I never thought I'd live to see the day when I would be treated like a stranger in my own home. Just last month, while guests were warmly welcomed into the comfort of my bed, I was forced to sleep in the cold, dark storage room, like an unwanted burden. My name is Eleanor. I'm 72 years old. I raised a family with love, sacrifice and pride. But now, I wonder if all of that meant anything. This is the story of how my daughter-in-law stripped me of my dignity, one painful decision at a time. The first thing my daughter-in-law, Sarah, said to me wasn't hello. It was, "Mother, we'll need your room." She stood in my doorway, my son Kevin lingering behind her, her smile as bright and hard as a polished stone. The other guests, my own nieces and nephews, looked down at their shoes, their silence a heavy blanket in the sudden chill of the room. They just watched as I, the woman who owned this house, was made homeless within its walls. Friend, before I tell you where my own son's wife sent me to sleep in my own house, do me a kindness. Tap subscribe so you're here to see what happens when they finally learn that a quiet woman doesn't mean a weak woman. I just stood there, my hand still on the pot of soup I had made for them, the warmth of it a stark contrast to the ice filling my veins. I looked at Kevin, my boy, searching his eyes for some sign of protest, some flicker of the child I raised. I found nothing but a man hiding behind his wife's ambition. "But this is my room," I whispered, the words feeling foolish and small as soon as they left my lips. Sarah's smile tightened. "Not tonight," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We have a different place for you to sleep." But she didn't say where. Sarah led me not upstairs, but down the narrow hallway toward the back of the house, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a countdown. She stopped in front of a door I hadn't opened in years and twisted the cold brass knob. "Here you are," she announced, swinging the door open. The air that hit me was stale and cold, thick with the scent of mothballs and forgotten things. It was the storage room. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling, old furniture was draped in white sheets like ghosts, and in the corner was a bare mattress thrown over a pile of old magazines. The dust in the air made my chest tight, and the chill from the concrete floor seeped into my bones. But that wasn't what truly hurt. As Sarah closed the door, leaving me in the dim light filtering through a single dirty window, I heard it. From the other side of the house, from the direction of my bedroom, came a sound that broke a piece of my heart. It was the sound of laughter, loud and carefree, coming from the room they had just taken from me. At the dinner table, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Sarah placed a steaming bowl of the soup I had made in front of my empty chair, then sat down in it herself, at the head of the table. I was given a wobbly stool at the very end, next to a stack of newspapers. Every clink of a spoon, every polite request to pass the salt, felt deafeningly loud. I kept my eyes on my son, Kevin, hoping he would look at me, just once. He never did. He just stared down at his plate, carefully cutting his roast beef into tiny, perfect squares. His silence was louder than any argument could ever be. It was a confession. When he needed the bread basket, which was right beside me, he didn't ask me for it. He gestured to his wife, and Sarah reached across the table, her rings clinking against the ceramic plate as she passed it to him. They were a team, a fortress of two, and I was on the outside. My entire dinner, I was consumed by a single burning question. I watched my son, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and wondered, did he know this was going to happen? Sleep was impossible. I lay on that lumpy mattress, the springs digging into my back, and listened to the sounds of the house. The groan of the pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, sounds that had comforted me for 40 years now felt alien and menacing. I pulled a dusty old quilt up to my chin, but the cold from the floor was relentless. Just as my eyes started to feel heavy, a new sound drifted through the thin wall that separated the storage room from my old bedroom. It was voices. Soft, muffled murmurs from my son, Kevin, and his wife, Sarah. At first, I tried to block it out, turning onto my side and pressing my face into the musty pillow. It was their room now, their private space. But then, a single word cut through the drywall like a shard of glass, sharp and clear. It was my name. They were talking about me. My breath caught in my throat, and I strained to hear more, my body perfectly still. I could only make out a few words here and there, but one phrase from Sarah came through with chilling clarity. And in that moment, what I heard next changed absolutely everything. I pressed my ear against the cold plaster wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sarah's voice was low but sharp, slicing through the quiet of the night. "It's just for a few more weeks, Kevin," she said. "Just until the papers are signed. Once that's done, she won't be a problem for us anymore." There was a pause, and I heard my son mumble something I couldn't understand, his voice weak and full of hesitation. "Don't go soft on me now," Sarah snapped back, her tone leaving no room for argument. "It's for the best. For our future. She's had her time. Papers? Signed? Not a problem anymore?" The words echoed in my mind, each one a hammer blow. This wasn't about disrespect or a temporary inconvenience. This was a calculated plan. This was a coup. My blood ran cold as the terrible truth settled in my gut. They weren't just taking my room for a holiday visit. They were plotting to take my entire life out from under me. I had to know what those papers were, what they were truly planning to do to me. But just then, their voices dropped to a whisper, and the rest of their poisonous plan was lost to the silence. The mornings were the worst part. I'd wake up on the lumpy mattress before the sun came up, my bones aching from the cold concrete floor. While the rest of the house slept warm in their beds, I would have to creep down the hallway to use the bathroom, my bare feet freezing on the wood floors, feeling like a thief under my own roof. I'd listen at the door, praying no one else was awake, the shame of it a hot coal in my stomach. This morning, something was different. I reached for my worn, comfortable slippers I kept right by the mattress. They were gone. I searched in the dim light, my hands patting the cold floor around me, but they were nowhere. It was a small thing, a pair of old slippers, but it felt like a deliberate cruelty. It was another way of telling me I didn't belong, that even this tiny corner of the house wasn't mine to claim. I finally gave up and tiptoed to the kitchen to make some tea, my feet aching from the cold. And that's when I saw her. Sarah was standing by the stove, humming to herself as she poured hot water into a mug, wearing my favourite quilted robe. Later that day, a cold dread settled over me. There was one thing I cherished more than anything, a small, simple gold locket on a chain. It held a tiny picture of my late husband, Michael, from the day we were married. I kept it in a little wooden jewellery box with a few other precious items. I went back to my pile of belongings in the storage room, my hands shaking as I searched for it. I moved aside a box of old blankets and my heart stopped. The small wooden box was gone. I searched everywhere, frantically, my breathing growing shallow. It wasn't there. I found Sarah in the living room, arranging flowers in a vase. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Sarah, have you seen my little jewellery box?" I asked. "The wooden one?" She didn't even look at me, just snipped the end off a rose. "I haven't seen it," she said, her voice breezy and unconcerned. "Honestly, Mother, you're getting so forgetful lately." She finally turned to look at me, a pitying smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure it will turn up once you stop panicking and remember where you put it." My last bit of hope rested with my son. I waited until Sarah was on the phone in the other room and found Kevin in the kitchen, staring out the window. "Kevin," I began, my voice trembling. "My necklace is gone. The one your father gave me." I watched his back, praying he would turn around, that he would show me the son I knew was still in there somewhere. He took a long sip of his coffee before he finally faced me, but his eyes were distant and cold. He wouldn't look at me. He just looked at a spot on the wall just past my shoulder. "Mum, you lose things all the time," he said, the words flat and empty. "Sarah's just worried about you. We all are." The phrase was so smooth, so practiced, it felt like a line from a script Sarah had written for him. The hope inside me withered and died. He wasn't on my side. He wasn't even a bystander anymore. He was a participant. As I stood there, speechless and heartbroken, he delivered the final, devastating blow. "Maybe Sarah is right," he said softly. "Maybe it's time we started helping you look after your affairs." His words, "look after your affairs," rang in my ears like a death sentence. They weren't just taking my room, they were trying to take my life. The fear that had been simmering in my heart now hardened into a cold, sharp anger. I wasn't going to let them erase me. I listened carefully, and a few minutes later I heard the front door click shut as Kevin and Sarah left to run errands. This was my chance. I had to get into my room. I had to find my necklace and see what they were doing in there. I hurried down the hallway, my pulse pounding in my ears. I reached for the familiar brass knob of my bedroom door and turned it. It didn't budge. I tried again, pushing with my shoulder. Nothing. They had locked it. They had locked me out of my own room in my own house. I stood there stunned, my hand still on the knob. Disbelief warred with a rising tide of fury. I pressed my ear against the cold white paint of the door, holding my breath to listen. I expected silence. But what I heard instead was a quiet, methodical shuffling sound coming from inside my room. Someone was in my room. Adrenaline surged through me, hot and sharp, burning away every last trace of fear. There was an old skeleton key for the upstairs rooms that my husband used to keep in a ceramic jar on the hall table. My hands shook as I retrieved it, the metal cool against my skin. I slid the key into the lock, the click of the tumblers turning sounding like a gunshot in the silent house. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, and threw the door open. Sarah was on her hands and knees in the middle of the floor, surrounded by the contents of my life. My drawers were pulled out, my personal letters were scattered, and my memory boxes were overturned. She wasn't just snooping. She was excavating my past. She looked up at me, not with surprise or shame, but with pure annoyance at being interrupted. Her eyes were triumphant. "There it is," she said, her voice a low hiss. She held up a single, folded piece of yellowed paper. "I knew you would have kept it." My heart stopped. It wasn't my necklace she was looking for. It was something else entirely. But what was it? After Sarah swept out of the room with that yellowed paper, a chilling silence settled around me. I was left alone amidst the wreckage of my own life, my personal history scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. My hands trembled as I began to put things back, my mind racing. What was that paper? What could be so important? I knelt down by the old cedar trunk where I kept our most important family documents, birth certificates, old letters and legal papers. The latch was broken, pried open. I lifted the heavy lid and my breath caught in my throat. The folder labelled Michael's Last Will Testament was there, but it was thinner than it should be. A document was clearly missing from the back. A cold wave of memory washed over me. I remembered my husband, Michael, sitting with me in this very room years ago, signing those papers. He had tapped a particular page. "This is the most important part, Eleanor," he had said, his voice firm. "It protects you. It ensures this house and everything in it is yours, absolutely and forever." And now, a piece of that protection was in Sarah's hands. The next morning, the air in the house had changed. Sarah's false sweetness from the day before was gone, replaced by something sharper and colder. When she passed me in the hallway, she no longer bothered with a pretend smile. Instead, she gave me a look of triumphant pity, as if I were a problem that had already been solved. At breakfast, she announced to the table, "I'll be paying the household bills from now on. Mother shouldn't have to worry her head about such things." My son, Kevin, just stared into his oatmeal, his silence giving his approval. Every word she spoke was a dagger wrapped in silk. She was taking over piece by piece, right in front of my eyes. Her politeness was a weapon, each courteous phrase designed to remind me that I was no longer in charge. Later, as I sat in the living room, she walked past and patted my shoulder. "Don't you worry about a thing," she whispered, her voice like ice. "We'll take good care of you." I looked at her cunning smile, and a terrifying realization finally clicked into place. This wasn't just about my house. My entire inheritance, my future, everything Michael and I had built was at stake. The cruelest cut came from the ones I least expected. My grandchildren, 10-year-old Timmy and 7-year-old Lisa. Before, they were my sunshine, always running to me for a hug or a story. Now, they avoided my gaze. When I saw them playing in the backyard, I went out with a plate of the cookies they loved. "Would you like one?" I asked, holding out the plate with a smile. Timmy just shook his head and ran to the other side of the yard. Lisa hesitated, her big blue eyes filled with a confusion that broke my heart. She looked from me to the kitchen window, where I could see Sarah watching us. The little girl took a step back, her lip trembling. "We can't," she whispered, her voice so quiet I could barely hear it. "Why not, sweetheart?" I asked, my own voice cracking. She looked down at her shoes and mumbled the words that felt like a slap in the face. "Mummy told us not to talk to you. She said you're sick in the head and that we should stay away." They weren't just isolating me. They were poisoning my own grandchildren against me. That evening, they set their trap. Some of our extended family were still visiting, and we were all gathered in the living room. The conversation was strained and awkward. I tried to break the tension, turning to my niece, Jessica. "That's a lovely scarf you're wearing," I said, my voice quiet. Suddenly, Sarah's sharp voice cut across the room. "Mother, please! That is incredibly rude." I stared at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" Sarah put on a performance of deep embarrassment. "Apologize to Jessica at once. You know perfectly well her husband lost his job last month. Telling her she's flaunting expensive things is just cruel." Jessica's face went pale. I was speechless. I hadn't said anything of the sort. Later, my son, Kevin, cornered me in the hall, his face a mask of cold anger. "I can't believe you did that, Mom. You embarrassed this entire family." "Kevin, she's lying," I pleaded. But he wouldn't listen. His eyes were hard as stones. "Sarah says you're getting confused, that you're not yourself. She says you need more help than we can give you here," he said, his voice flat and final. "If something like this happens again, we're going to have to send you away." Send me away. The threat hung in the air of that cold storage room, a final suffocating blow. They had taken my bed, my belongings, my son's love, and my grandchildren's trust. They had stolen my past and were now threatening to steal my future. I sank down onto the lumpy mattress, the weight of it all pressing down on me, and for a moment I felt nothing but a vast, empty despair. This was it. This was how my life ended, as a confused old woman being sent away by her own son. The tears I expected to fall simply wouldn't come. I sat there in the dusty darkness, and a strange thing happened. The shivering stopped. The knot of fear in my stomach didn't loosen, but hardened into something else. Something solid. Something strong. They expected me to weep. They wanted me to break. They were counting on me to be the frail, forgetful old woman they had painted me to be. And in that moment, I decided I would not give them the satisfaction. They had made a terrible mistake. They assumed that a quiet woman was a weak woman, and as I sat there in the cold, a different kind of warmth spread through me. It was the warmth of pure, focused rage, and I started to make a plan. My newfound resolve was fragile, a single candle flame in a storm. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. The next day, as I was washing dishes in the kitchen, my niece Carol came in. She was a quiet woman who had mostly stayed in the background. She gently took the dish towel from my hands. "You rest, Eleanor," she said softly. Her eyes were kind, and for the first time in weeks, someone looked at me without pity or contempt. What Sarah said the other night? About you insulting Jessica? I was sitting right there. You never said a word of it. It was a cruel lie. A dam inside me broke, and I told her everything. The storage room, the missing necklace, the threat of being sent away. She listened patiently, her expression growing darker with every word. I felt a sliver of hope. I wasn't entirely alone. I wasn't crazy. When I finished, she looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "Be careful, Eleanor," she whispered, her voice urgent. "I think this is about more than just the house. The day you arrived, I overheard Sarah on the phone with someone. She mentioned your husband, Michael, and a name I recognized, George Vance." My blood ran cold. George was my husband's old business partner, a man he never trusted. Carol's warning echoed in my mind. George Vance. What did he have to do with this? That night, I couldn't sleep. I went back to the storage room, my mind racing, trying to connect the pieces. I wasn't looking for comfort anymore. I was looking for a weapon. I began methodically going through the few belongings they had left me, searching for anything that might help. As I lifted the thin, lumpy mattress to move a box, my fingers brushed against something hidden in a tear in the fabric. It was a thick, sealed envelope. It felt old, the paper softened with age. I pulled it into the dim light from the hallway. My name, Eleanor, was written across the front in a familiar, shaky script. My heart stopped. It was my husband Michael's handwriting. A wave of confusion washed over me. Why would Michael hide a letter here? This old mattress had been in the guest room for years before being tossed in here. He must have hidden it long ago, a secret waiting to be found. With trembling fingers, I broke the wax seal. What did my husband need to tell me from beyond the grave? My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. Inside was a handwritten note and a notarized document. It was a copy of the very page I suspected was missing from my husband's will. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are facing a fight I prayed you would never have. I have always worried about George Vance. He is a greedy man. I fear he might one day try to make a claim on our assets, perhaps by using our son's trust against you." The words were a ghostly echo of my own fears. The letter went on to explain. Michael had created a special provision, an ironclad clause, making it legally impossible for the house to be sold or transferred without my signature, in the presence of his specific lawyer, Mr. Davison. The paper Sarah had stolen must have been an old, invalid draft. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it made me dizzy. I had the power. But the relief was followed by a sharp, stabbing pain as I read the final line of the letter. "I know our Kevin will always be there to protect you," Michael had written. "He is a good son." Did my son know he was betraying his father's final wish? I held my husband's letter to my chest, the paper a shield over my broken heart. Michael had trusted him. Now I had to know, once and for all, if there was any part of my son left to save. The next afternoon, I found Kevin alone in the den, looking over some papers Sarah had left for him. I put on my best performance, making my voice frail and my shoulders slump in defeat. "Kevin," I said softly, "you're right. I'm just getting old and confused. I think it's best if you and Sarah handle my affairs from now on." I watched his face, searching for any flicker of remorse, any shadow of guilt. There was nothing. His expression, which had been tight with stress, suddenly relaxed. I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated relief in his eyes before he quickly masked it. The sight of it chilled me to the bone. He wasn't a reluctant participant, he was a willing partner. He patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt dismissive and cruel. "It's for the best, Mum," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "We have some papers for you to sign with Sarah's lawyer. It will make everything much simpler." He was walking right into the trap. I had to push him one last time, to hear it from his own lips. I looked up at him, my eyes wide with feigned confusion. "But what about what your father wanted?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He always said this house was for me to live in for the rest of my days. He made me promise." For a second I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Shame, perhaps. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, hard impatience. The mask finally dropped. "Dad's gone, Mum," he snapped, his voice harsh and unfamiliar. He didn't understand the market. He didn't understand what this house is worth. He gestured wildly around the room, his eyes gleaming with a greedy light I had never seen before. "Sarah and I have plans for our future. We have goals. We need this. I need this." The confession hung in the air, raw and ugly. It wasn't just Sarah. It was him. My son had chosen money over his own mother. In that moment, the boy I had raised vanished forever, replaced by this cold, selfish stranger. The walls of my own home suddenly felt like they were closing in on me. The knowledge of my son's betrayal was a cold, hard stone in my chest, but it was also a foundation. The grief was gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. I was no longer a victim, I was a strategist. In the quiet of my storage room, I laid out my husband Michael's letter and the notarized document he had left me. This was my shield and my sword. My first move was to contact his lawyer. I waited until Sarah and Kevin were out, then walked 3 blocks to a small grocery store and used the payphone by the door, the cold plastic receiver pressed hard against my ear. I left a message for Mr. Davison, using a code name Michael and I once used. As I waited for his call back, I played my part. I was the defeated old woman, quiet and compliant. My meekness made my daughter-in-law, Sarah, reckless. Flushed with her apparent victory, she grew careless. She'd leave bank statements on the kitchen counter. She'd speak loudly on the phone about meetings with real estate agents. She believed she had already won, and her arrogance was making her sloppy. The next day, my borrowed phone buzzed. It was Mr. Davison. "Eleanor," he said, his voice grave. "I'm glad you called. Someone has been making inquiries about Michael's estate. I think it's time we met." Sarah decided to host a large Sunday dinner, a victory lap to show off her new domain. She invited her own friends, loud, flashy people who looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. She was acting as the grand matriarch of the house she believed was already hers. As guests took their seats at the long dining table, I realized there was no place set for me. "Oh, goodness!" Sarah exclaimed with a theatrical gasp. "I completely forgot." She then directed me to a small, wobbly card table she had set up in the corner, far from everyone else as if I were a misbehaving child. Throughout the meal, she made me the target of her cruel jokes. "Don't mind Mother," she'd say loudly. "She gets so confused these days." Some guests laughed uncomfortably. Others, like my niece Carol, stared at their plates in stony silence. I endured it all. I ate my food, head held high, and did not say a word. My silence only made Sarah bolder. She saw a woman who was broken, who had given up the fight. But as she made one final cutting remark about my failing memory, I looked up and met her gaze across the room. And I smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, a promise of what was to come that she was too arrogant to understand. As the dessert plates were being cleared, I caught Carol's eye and gave her the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. Carol, who had been silent all evening, gently cleared her throat. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the chatter like a bell. "Sarah, I was hoping you could clarify something for me," she began. Every head turned towards her. Sarah looked annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Carol?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Carol's gaze was steady. "The other day I couldn't help but overhear you on the phone in the garden. You were speaking with a man named George Vance." At the mention of the name, Sarah's smile faltered. Carol pressed on, her voice growing stronger. "You said, and I remember this very clearly, The old woman has no idea. Once she signs the papers next week, the house and all assets will be ours to liquidate. You sounded so pleased. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. I was just so confused. I thought this was Eleanor's house. The room went completely, utterly silent. Every eye in the room, friends, family, strangers, was now fixed on Sarah, whose face had become a pale, frozen mask of disbelief. Sarah sputtered, her arrogance evaporating into panic. That's a ridiculous lie. I never said that. She's making it up. Her voice was shrill, desperate. But I didn't look at her. I turned my gaze to my son. I let all the pain, all the love I ever had for him, fill my eyes. My voice was not angry, but heavy with a sorrow that filled the silent room. Kevin, I said gently, tell them it's a lie. Please, tell our family that you weren't planning to sell the home your father built for us. Tell them you didn't help your wife try to have me declared incompetent just so you could take my money. Every word was a nail, pinning him in place. He looked at Sarah's frantic, pleading face, then at my own, which held only the devastating truth. The weight of his choices, now laid bare for all to see, seemed to physically crush him. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face was slick with sweat. He was cracking, shattering under the pressure of his own shame. Kevin, tell them! Sarah shrieked, grabbing his arm. Tell them your mother is a confused old liar. The question hung in the air, a final, terrible choice. Would he cling to the lie with his wife, or finally collapse under the weight of the truth? Before my son, Kevin, could utter a word, I knew I had to end it. I stood up from my small table, the entire room watching my every move. Perhaps you're right, Sarah, I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong, resonating with a power no one in that room had ever heard from me. I am old, and I'm so very tired of all this fighting. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a folded document and a pen. I walked to the main dining table and placed them in front of Sarah. Here, I said calmly. This document gives you full power of attorney over everything I own. Just sign it, and it's all yours. Sarah's eyes, which had been wide with panic, now narrowed with a triumphant, greedy light. She thought I was surrendering. She snatched the pen, her hand shaking with eagerness. But there is one condition, I said, stopping her just before the pen touched the paper. You must state, for everyone here to witness, exactly why you need this and what you will do with my assets. Believing she had won, Sarah threw her head back with a cruel laugh. Fine, I need it because she's incompetent, and we are selling this house and everything in it, effective immediately. Just as her pen stroke began, the front door swung open. A man in a dark suit stepped inside. That won't be happening, he said. My name is Mr. Davison. I am Eleanor's attorney, and I believe I have just witnessed a public confession to attempted fraud. Sarah stared at the lawyer, Mr. Davison, then at me, her face a canvas of disbelief turning to pure, unfiltered rage. The mask of the gracious hostess shattered, and the monster I knew was hiding underneath finally showed itself. You! She shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. You planned this, you miserable old witch! Her voice was a raw, ugly thing that echoed through the stunned silence of the room. The guests shrank back from her, their faces pale with shock. She was no longer trying to hide her greed. She was drowning in it. She turned on my son, Kevin, her eyes wild. And you! You were too weak to do what was necessary. I had to do it all. In her fury, the last of her caution dissolved, and the truth came pouring out in a torrent of hate. I found the first draft of the will in her desk weeks ago. I knew I could get her to sign it over. We had it all planned. Me and George Vance, this house, this money, it should have been ours. The public confession, screamed for all to hear, was more damning than anything I could have ever orchestrated. The guests were utterly horrified, staring at her as if she had just grown a second head. After Sarah's venomous confession, a thick, heavy silence fell over the room. Every ounce of sympathy, every shred of doubt, had vanished. There was only the ugly truth hanging in the air. Mr. Davison stood by the door, his face a grim professional mask. Sarah, breathing heavily, seemed to realize what she had just done. Desperate, she grabbed my son's arm, her painted nails digging into his sleeve. "Kevin," she hissed, her voice a ragged whisper. "Do something. Don't let them do this to us, to our future." All eyes in the room, nieces, nephews, friends and lawyers, turned to my son. He stood frozen between his snarling wife and me. I said nothing. I simply stood there, my heart aching for the boy he once was, and waited. He looked at Sarah's face, contorted with greed and rage, and then he looked at me, at the mother he had betrayed. I could see the war in his eyes, the shame, the weakness, the flicker of a conscience long buried. He was completely and utterly torn. He took one, shuffling step forward, but the entire room held its breath, waiting to see which direction he would finally choose. Before Kevin could take another step, before he could make his final shattering choice, I held up my hand, signalling for silence. "It no longer matters what he chooses," I said, my voice resonating with an authority that commanded the attention of the entire room. I looked past my broken son and my hateful daughter-in-law and met the calm, steady gaze of my lawyer. "Mr. Davison," I said, "if you would, please." He nodded grimly and stepped forward, unrolling a thick, official-looking document. The paper crackled in the silent room. "This," Mr. Davison announced, his voice clear and firm, "is the final, fully executed will of Michael Miller." He cleared his throat. "I will read the relevant clause regarding this property. Article 4. The marital home and all its contents are bequeathed solely and irrevocably to my beloved wife, Eleanor Miller. This clause is ironclad and cannot be superseded by any prior draft or future claim." He then held up my husband's letter. The document Mrs. Miller's daughter-in-law found was a worthless, unsigned draft. A collective gasp went through the room. The truth landed like a lightning strike. Sarah's entire vicious scheme had been built on a foundation of pure fantasy. It was all for nothing. Sarah stared at the will, then at Mr. Davison, her mind unable to process the totality of her defeat. The life she had schemed for, the fortune she had been so close to stealing, had vanished into thin air. It had never even been within her reach. Her friends, the ones she had invited to witness her coronation, now looked at her with disgust and contempt. She looked desperately at my son Kevin for support, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. He had finally, and completely, turned away from her, his face a mask of profound shame. Her power, built on lies and manipulation, had crumbled to dust in a single moment. From the doorway I saw my grandchildren, Timmy and Lisa, creep into the room, their eyes wide. They had seen it all. They looked at their mother's shattered face, and then they looked at me, their grandmother, who had stood tall against the storm. They saw not a frail old woman, but a protector, a matriarch. In that moment, the poison Sarah had fed them was gone. They ran to me, wrapping their small arms around my legs, a silent, perfect act of love and loyalty. Seeing this, the last of Sarah's fight left her. She let out a choked sob, turned, and fled the room, her humiliation absolute and complete. Weeks have passed. The house is quiet now. The angry ghosts of greed and betrayal have been banished. My son Kevin and Sarah are gone. He left with her, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his shame, promising to find a way to earn back the trust he had so thoroughly broken. I hope for his sake that one day he can. I have my home back. I have my dignity. I sit in my favourite armchair in my own living room, watching my grandchildren play in the sunlit yard. Their laughter is the only sound that matters. I have forgiven my son, as a mother must, but I will not forget what I learned. I learned that there is a lioness inside every quiet woman, waiting for the moment she is needed. Friend, thank you for staying with me to the very end. If you believe that strength isn't about how loud you shout, but about the quiet truth you hold in your heart, then please tap subscribe and join our community. You won't want to miss the stories we share next.